off air. All right, now we're on air. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Gestalt IT Rundown, our weekly show where we run down the news with myself, I'm Rich Stroffolino, and my good guest, friend, compatriot, coworker, Tom Hollingsworth. Tom, thanks for being on the show.
No problem, Rich. Thanks for the invitation.
Absolutely. I got a feeling you'll get one, I'm going to say every week. All right, so let's get it going here. Kind of not a huge week in terms of announcements or anything like that, but I thought some interesting stuff came up. One of the big ones, a little bit more on the financial side, that I think is interesting was the earnings reports came out for Microsoft, Amazon, and Google. All of these are giant quadrillion most valuable companies arguably in the world at any given week, depending on the machinations of the stock markets. But some interesting stuff in terms of public cloud. I mean, these are all big technology companies in general, but public cloud is, I think, where some of the more interesting numbers come from. Leading it off, Amazon's the only company that really breaks out cloud revenue just by itself, so you can kind of see it quarter to quarter, which I think is really interesting. Their AWS revenue grew 42%, now represents 11% of all company revenue. But what's always really interesting about Amazon is they make no profit on anything else but the cloud. They made $1.1 billion in profit on the cloud on $4.5 billion in revenue. Clearly, they are the leader in terms of mind share, in terms of financially, in a lot of ways. Their growth has slowed a little bit. I think it was in the high 50s last quarter, and obviously it's been growing like gangbusters. One is what is the ceiling, I guess, for public cloud? Because even though $4.5 billion is a lot of money, in terms of enterprise spending for something that's eating the entire enterprise, $4.5 billion also seems really small.
It does. And I still think it's because a lot of people aren't 100% convinced that cloud is the thing to do yet. And the fact that the revenue trend started falling off slightly tells me that a lot of companies are starting to have some conversations internally, which is what I imagine was going to happen. Yeah, there's a lot of very good reasons to go to cloud. One of them is not the budget, though. A lot of people were probably starting to get those AWS bills and going, what did we order from Amazon?
Oh yeah, our business, right?
Yeah. The DevOps people are sitting in the back going, everything. And so it's starting to make the conversation happen, which is really what needed to happen with a lot of people. Plus, when you've got a lot of people on the other side of traditional enterprise IT that are pushing the AWS plus us conversation. VMware is a huge one that I can think of off the top of my head.
Does the concern over cost for a lot of enterprises, it's kind of these bills are coming due and they're doing the cost analysis and they're seeing, hey, we've gone cloud native, or we've done our digital transformation. We're living in the cloud now for a year or something like that. And all of a sudden the economics aren't working out. Does that make, AWS Lambda services and serverless kind of stuff, does that make that more prescient? Because even though it might not be the most cost effective on like a per instance basis, it's even more on demand than a cloud instance already is. Do you think that changes the game, like put more of an emphasis on serverless down the road?
Maybe. I part of it to me is companies still in IT. We have this real bad problem of new thing comes out, so let's take the old stuff we were doing and make it work with the new thing and make it look very identical. So naturally, infrastructure as a service is a huge thing, and once people figure out how to make all that work, okay, now let's move on to serverless and Lambda and things like that. But I'm also wondering if part of it isn't that a lot of people are looking at their cloud computing spend going, okay, I'm getting a lot of resource for this, but I'm not getting a lot of help with it. There's not a lot of IT wizard knowledge that's going on here. It's a bunch of developers banging away at code all day. And, it's as sad as it sounds, it's kind of reassuring to know that Bob, the storage admin's downstairs, making sure that things are running. And if things happen, you can go yell at Bob. You can't really go yell at Jeff Bezos. I believe he's living on some kind of strange rocket mansion in the stratosphere right now or something.
Yeah, he's just living like the billionaire in Contact with Jodie Foster up in space. The other interesting thing is looking at the other two presumed gorillas in the room. What's really interesting here is I just want to give a brief mention. While Oracle is not, I don't think anyone's top three when it comes to public cloud or anything like that. Same thing with IBM, which I always think is a little bit misplaced. Just people just don't want to think about IBM anymore. I don't know why, other than Watson. I don't know why, but Oracle is really interesting in public cloud, not because of where they're at right now, but because clearly Larry Ellison and his insanity has identified it as this huge, like obviously is the future of their business, and is putting gigantic financial incentives for everyone at the top of Oracle. Like I think everyone's bonuses are tied to hitting very, very, very aggressive revenue targets for cloud services. So, you know, I'll be interested to see down the road how they're able to get that, just because, I mean, clearly they're going to be motivated. But getting into Microsoft and Google, Google is the worst at trying to parse out their Google Cloud revenue. Clearly, they've been aggressive with a lot of partnerships. They just had a big announcement with their nested virtualization features, and a lot of partnerships that went along with that. But they lump it all together in their other bets category, which is basically where they put all of their things that don't make, or that aren't profitable and don't make money. And the revenue on other bets is up to $3.4 billion for the quarter. It's up 40%, but there's no breakouts. That includes DeepMind. That includes, I believe, Waymo. That includes a whole bunch of other projects that they're sinking a lot of money in and probably not getting a lot of revenue from. I'm assuming the vast majority of that is cloud related. But you know, there's no way to tell if the vast majority means 70%, 80%, you know, 90%. I'm assuming it's probably on the lower end of that kind of revenue target. So, you know, it says something about the confidence that Google has in their public cloud market share, and where they're at kind of at large with public cloud, that they're not willing to break those out quite yet.
I think we'll know the day that Google Cloud makes $1 of profit, because I'll start seeing ads for it in my Gmail, and Wall Street Journal will do like 14 articles on it. Now, I think that this is carefully being hidden for a reason. It's because, Amazon used to be a really awesome bookstore that also had some cloud computing stuff, and now it's a really awesome cloud computing company that can sell you books and diapers. Google is a really weird company that makes cars and email and search engines, and they just happen to have a cloud computing engine somewhere. Google does not like to make everyone aware that they are betting on losers, and they tend to cut off those losers pretty quickly. Rip Google Reader, love you, buddy. It's still going to be a little bit of time before Google Compute Engine, Google Cloud Engine, Google, whatever they're calling it this week, is ready enough to go out there. And honestly, for the amount of people that are using it, like you said, I'd make a bigger bet on Larry Ellison becoming the next cloud emperor, if only because he will literally put his entire evil overlord budget into beating Amazon.
Yeah, that's true. I do think, though, like to take an analogy from maybe like the U.S. telecom market, Google Cloud always reminds me of like the T-Mobile of it, where it's just like, we have bags of cash, we're in third, we have nothing to lose by being a little crazy sometimes. So and maybe, you know, this isn't old Google. You're not going to see like just total harebrained project ideas. They do have some kind of eye toward fiscal responsibility now, unlike, you know, like that. So you're not going to see, you know,
Well, if you're following
okay.
along, yeah, I think Rich,
did you just disconnect there?
Yeah, man, you were on a really good rant, and I think that Larry Ellison heard you, and he flipped a switch somewhere. So
I don't know. I think we're using Google Hangouts, so maybe I besmirched Google too much. So where was I with talking about Microsoft here?
I didn't hear a word about Microsoft, so let's take it from the top.
Well, kind of splitting the difference between Google with absolutely no disclosure, Amazon separating out totally, as Microsoft with their intelligent cloud revenue. One of the more brilliant moments, they decided to lump in Azure revenue with Windows Server. And so what you have is just a nice steady growth throughout the history of Azure. They'll tell you how much Azure grows every quarter. Revenue has grown 90%. Which sounds amazing, but also tells me that there's a lot of room for Azure to grow. but they generated 6.9 billion in that combined server cloud category, and that was up 14%. 2.1 billion of that was in profit, though, which I think is really interesting. Although I'm assuming a lot of that has to go back with server. And server revenue overall grew 17%. So you can kind of tease out a little bit there. I've seen some conversations, though, that some people have said that it might not be fair quite to compare Azure to AWS apples to apples, just because some of the business goals of that are different. I know Azure is really heavy on media services and a lot of functionality to go along with that. We've seen some interesting companies. I've talked to Archive 360, which is doing like integrated cold storage for SharePoint, kind of built into Azure. So I don't think it's unfair to compare it to AWS, because clearly, I mean, public cloud is public cloud. You can still buy storage, you can still buy compute, you can still buy these base building blocks. If you're in the Settlers of Catan of public cloud, you can still get your ore, your sheep. But maybe Google is doing more fish and Microsoft is going for longest road. Just kind of interesting to see where everybody's at with public cloud right now.
Yeah, Microsoft is a prime example of what happens when a traditional infrastructure IT company looks at cloud and tries to build it out. And I can't fault it. Microsoft's doing a really good job of it. They're treating Azure like somebody buying Microsoft servers somewhere else. And it works for them. And the way that you look at what they've done with it, where they've kind of bundled their licenses and they've moved all of their development environments over, and they're giving you free Visual Studio licenses, it makes total sense. It's just that, Amazon, again, being the world's biggest bookstore that also runs a cloud engine, they didn't want to do that. So like, well, we'll just do whatever we want. And I still think that secretly Google is it's a Kubernetes Trojan horse. They're just trying to get everybody on there so that they can announce the death of servers and, hey, we're off on running on containers.
Well, they already got Docker on board, so we'll see where those pieces fall. So kind of moving on from public cloud, we've had some other interesting studies come out. One of my favorites that comes out every quarter or every half a year or something like that is the backup services vendor Backblaze always comes out with their annual drive reliability figures. I don't know, maybe I'm just a huge hardware dork, but I love seeing like what drives are awesome, what drives are terrible. But one really interesting thing is they just replaced a bunch of Seagate Helium high-capacity drives, like 10, 12 terabyte drives, and replaced a bunch of 4 terabyte ones. And in their early testing, they're actually seeing higher drive failures on the enterprise drives versus the consumer drives. They're still very low. I think it's 1.1 versus 1.2%. You could say that's in the margin of error, but they are using like thousands and thousands of drives. So it's not like they're just, it's not like they just have 100 drives and one of them failed and a platter on one failed or something like that. So they have a little bit to work with. I just think it's very interesting. It reminds me of a little bit of the CPU market, where every Intel Core i series processor is basically the same. It's just bin differently. So they shut off different parts of it and they say this is an i3 because it doesn't have the thermal tolerances. Are hard drive manufacturers, outside of the service warranty aspect of this, is this kind of like a sign that Seagate's just really good at building hard drives? Western Digital is really good at building hard drives, and it's hard to differentiate purely on quality when it comes to drive failure at this point. I'm just kind of curious on that.
Yeah, the notes that they put in there about the Seagate failures were actually kind of illuminating to me, because obviously anybody who reads this, the first thing they're going to do is, oh, hey, it's more reliable to go out and buy a whole bunch of commercial Seagate consumer Seagate drives. So some guy gets the corporate credit card and heads over to Best Buy, and Backblaze was like, hold on a minute. You do get extra stuff on top of the warranty and support. You also get more caching and things like that. I think what we're seeing realistically is that all hard drives are basically the same anymore. And I say this knowing that Stephen Foskett's going to watch this episode.
I could just hear Stephen like this record scratch go over. Yeah.
No, what I think it means is that a lot of the hardware that we're dealing with is going to be, everything is going to look identical because of the capacities that we're getting into and the fact that there's not really a lot you can do to differentiate drives. So they're going to start doing value add stuff, extra caching tiers, software recovery, the ability to, have Minder programs running on the drives to keep data from failing over or disappearing during rebuild times. Really what we're starting to see is the ceiling for these drives. I mean, when you look at things like, helium field, shingled magnetic recording, 12 gig platter, no, we're seeing Flash slowly starting to eat the world, and it's just a matter of time before Backblaze starts dropping huge Titanic Flash drives into their arrays, because let's face it, that's where the real innovation's happening.
Well, but it is interesting that on kind of a hyperscale level, was just reading some of the standards that SNE has been putting out for hyperscalers that are using bulk disk storage, and with the I think it's the Depop standard. What they're trying to do is enable a way programmatically to instances where disks are either have bad sectors, or they're just getting high latency, like on very specific areas of reads, and just shutting off either a platter or a portion of the platter, or just minor sections of the disk, because that honestly is the bigger problem right now for a lot. When you get to gigantic scale. Mm-hmm. Isn't storage. They really don't care. It's not failure. They don't really care about a drive failure. They just go around with a shopping cart and pull out all the hundreds of drives that fail every day. But what's really important is avoiding those unpredictable latencies or hard to predict latencies, and that's what's coming down. So it is interesting. The other thing that was really kind of going along with the all hard drives are the same. They did say that this was the lowest failure rate from all of their studies was this quarter. Some of that was, again, because they have a lot of proportion of newer drives, but that is interesting. The one thing I'll note, though, is even though the failure rate is lower, your surface area for what that drive failure means, and then the rebuild time on top of that, to a 12 terabyte drive, I mean, that is something to take into consideration too. So you kind of need that lower failure rate to justify that.
Yeah, I think you're going to start seeing, I think the failure rate's probably going to start going down over time for them. But it's just going to be a matter of the fact that when you have a 12 terabyte drive, it needs to work right. And so the tolerances on those things are getting really, really tight.
All right, next up, we had an interesting announcement from Zero Tier. They're a small network virtualization, kind of SD-WAN, kind of fancy VPN provider. And generally what they do is it's the standard SD-WAN. It's not SD-WAN, but it's the SD-WAN pitch where everything appears to be on your local network. You can manage it like it's on your local network, but it's all at remote sites. It's very interesting stuff. You can run it on, I run it on my Mac just for fun because I'm a weirdo. But they have actually an Indiegogo campaign for the Zero Tier Edge, which is basically a physical appliance that gives you physical ports to offer their service to either dumb appliances or old servers that can't quite run their software, or that you just don't want to run your software. Their example they give is, if you have 100 client machines at a site, you don't have to install a piece of software on all of them. You could argue probably you should have automation to just handle that very easily for you. But I do think is this going to be a thing, crowdsourcing what is essentially enterprise class hardware? That just seems very odd to me.
Yeah, I think it's going to be that going forward, just because when you're a company that isn't getting a lot of money from funding, whether it be from angel investors or people who are pouring the money in, it's very difficult to get the capital together to put these things out there. And with Indiegogo and Kickstarter and all these other ones basically providing a platform for you to build a capital expenditure list for hardware manufacturers, it makes a lot of sense. And we've even seen that with a couple of crowdsourced things. I think there was an OpenFlow enabled switch that went out a while back that a lot of people were going gaga for. It's like $200 for a 4-port OpenFlow switch. And then you got this and a bunch of other things. And they've crowdsourced a movie. So I'm totally going to see Super Troopers too. But it's the way to go. And if you make it work, I mean, you basically, as long as you don't screw up the campaign, you've got capital to make units, and you have a waiting list of people that want them. That's enough that you can start using as a building block, maybe to attract an investor and go, okay, hey, we've proven there's a market for this. I mean, I'm thinking back to my old VAR days, $150 for a VPN termination point that I could then use to maybe remotely monitor a company's network. Oh, yeah, give me a crate. I'll take those. I mean, I used to spend 4 times that to get the cheapest firewall I could from Fortinet to do the exact same thing. And I hated those things.
So, we kind of talked last week about the idea of, we're seeing MongoDB IPO and the state of investment kind of in enterprise IT kind of maybe arguably slowing down. Maybe if that's a sign that it's changing, or just MongoDB is MongoDB. But the it does raise a question. Every once in a while, I'll talk to a company that is self-funded, that, instead of getting that angel investment and getting that, bags and bags of cash, spent like 3-4 years, self-funded, building their product, slowly coming to market, building with a small group of customers, and really building themselves out on a much slower basis, but arguably maybe a little bit more sustainably, long-term, or at least profitable, or an emphasis on profitability. Does something like crowdfunding enterprise hardware, does that provide a better path for that?
I think it does, because when you self-fund, you have to be very careful about the steps that you take. It's a little bit more conservative. I remember the graphic of minimum viable product that has like the unicycle and then the skateboard and then the bicycle. That's self-funding. You have to, every step has to make money somewhere. Versus angel investing, which is, hey, let's go buy 4 Learjets and rent office space in San Francisco, and oh crap, we ran out of money before we made a product. Crowdsourcing is kind of in the middle. It's like, I can ask people to buy a thing and then take their money and use their money to build the thing they wanted to buy. And for the most part, it pays off. If the problem is your customers have to kind of take it on faith. I mean, the last thing I backed on a crowdfunding thing was a white book. So it's a whiteboard paper in a book, and I backed it the week before it made, and it still took me like 4 months to get the white book, which is great. I love the thing, but that instant gratification of going down to CDW or Tech Data or even Best Buy and being like, I'll take 5 of those. Yeah, you gotta have some longer timelines there.
Yeah, I wonder though also what the because Zero Tier, like I said, is a smaller company. We don't, they need the capital to make this happen. This isn't happening, arguably, if they don't raise their funding. If for a different size company, like when does the goodwill end? When does it stop being, oh, this is a cool product, I love to see this happen, I want to get some kind of personal equity in making this product happen? Like if Cisco comes out for the Catalyst 10,000 switch and says, if we raise $10 billion, you can get your early, you can get your special collector's edition firmware for your Switch or something like that. I mean, obviously that's ridiculous. But what is the end? Like, what is the maximum? Could a publicly traded company ever do this?
No. The quick answer is
on an enterprise level.
Yeah, at an enterprise level, and it comes down to 2 things. One, do you know the company has enough capital backing it, or can get the paper to do it, to do a manufacturing run? I mean, and realistically speaking, even companies that can't do that right now, they can order from companies like EdgeCore and get really cheap equipment in, start building on it. But the second thing, price point. Nobody is going to back a thing that cost $1,000 in this space. As long as the price point for what you're doing is sub-grand, and I would say argue you could maybe go down to about $500, that's where it makes sense. Anything more than that, basically, if I can't whip out the corporate credit card and pay for it 1 or 2 at a time, then it doesn't make sense. If I have to cut you a PO,
problematic.
Yeah, or if I have to get paper, that's where you got to go with it.
Absolutely. And then finally, we're running a little short on time here, so I just want to get this in real quick. The open architecture was provided to the IEEE standards working group to kind of begin for fog computing. I love the idea of fog computing. I'm pretty sure it's fun and will never happen, and this is like Digital City 2.0 on a scale of 0 being hype beast that will never happen, and 10 being a sure thing. Tom, where does this kind of move fall in fog computing actually happening? And can you just define fog computing real quick?
So fog computing, according to all the definitions that I've seen, is with the explosion of IoT devices, they're pushing the compute nodes out to the edge as opposed to putting them in the cloud, because it turns out that somebody ran the numbers. And when you have billions of devices eating cloud compute cycles, your Amazon bill has more commas in it than most of my writing. And so they're like, maybe what we really need to do is find a way to take advantage of the compute power of all those things on the edge that are basically just sitting there idle. And so fog computing is cloud computing on the deck.
Sum up, yeah, it's pushing compute capacity all the way to the IoT kind of endpoints, and using that as a giant, basically a giant swarm. I mean, the idea, like this stupid reason aka IoT. That's basically where it's at. So where does this fall in the is this actually happening spectrum?
I give this about a 2. The processors in IoT devices are not good for complicated tasks, even in swarm.
Tommy, you are breaking up, unfortunately. I'm going to cut you off here, Tom. I'm going to say that you said for sure this is happening, and in no way will this end up being incredibly disappointing and or implement down the road. I mean, the fact that it's going to the IEEE, at least like there are really smart people working on that. There are reference architectures going, arguably. I know many fine IEEE people, don't worry. But the fact that it's not just, I'm not just seeing it on a slide deck of saying, you know, we're fog computing enabled. The fact that we're working on reference architectures, at least to me, puts this above, I'll give it a 6 on the possibility of maybe happening. Maybe if they can put it on a Raspberry Pi, it will eat the world.
You're brave. I tell you what, fog computing will end up in the same bin as NVGRE. And if you don't know what that is, you're in the same boat as a lot of other people.
We're not some. So hopefully check us out there. We'll repost that over there too. If you have any topics that you think we should be checking out, send them to me at rich@Gestalt IT. Would love to hear them. And if you have any idea for guests or people you'd like us to talk to, send them on over as well. You can check me out at Mr. Anthropology on Twitter. Find more of my writing. Until next Wednesday, you can check out our podcast, gestaltit.com/podcast, and that's the on-premise IT roundtable. Yes, I know it annoys you. All right, we'll be back next Wednesday. Until then, take it easy, everybody. The stream.